All right, so a lot of you have been asking about this one. This book's Surrounded by Idiots.
Yeah.
It's by Thomas Erikson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about personality types, right? It's got the red, yellow, green, and blue.
Yep.
So we're going to take a deep dive into that today and see if it's worth your time.
You bet.
Now, I know you had some pretty strong opinions about this one.
I did.
So lay it on us. What's the verdict?
Not recommended.
Whoa. Okay. Straight to the point. I got to admit, I was kind of intrigued by this one. Like I said, it's everywhere.
Right.
And those color-coded personality types,
Mm.
they just seem so simple and easy to understand. You know, what's wrong with it?
Well, for starters, the whole thing is based on the DISC assessment. Yeah, DISC, dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. It's a personality typing system that's, well, it's not really scientifically valid.
Okay, I've heard of DISC, but I don't really know much about it. What's the problem with it?
Basically, it tries to categorize people into these 4 rigid categories, which just doesn't really reflect the complexity of human personality. It's like trying to categorize all music into just 4 genres. You'd miss out on so much nuance.
Right, so you're saying it's oversimplifying things.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, Erikson actually acknowledges this in the book.
Oh, really?
He literally tells readers to skip the chapter on sources if they're not interested in boring science. It's almost like he knows it's not that credible.
Wow, that's not a great sign. So what sources does he cite, if any?
Well, he mentions Hippocrates' 4 humors, the Aztec elements, and of course Marston's DISC profile, which we already talked about.
Right. None of those are exactly scientifically sound, are they?
No. Not by today's standards anyway.
So it's like he's building his whole system on this shaky foundation.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I see your point. But even if the science isn't there, do you think there's any value in the way he describes the different personality types? I mean, a lot of people seem to find them relatable.
He does have a knack for observation. I'll give him that. He can be pretty funny, too. Like, for example, he talks about blue personalities, the detail-oriented analytical types. And he says if you tell a blue person to just ignore the details in a contract, he'll stare at you very attentively and wonder about your mental capabilities.
Haha. Yeah, I know a few people like that.
Right. It's entertaining, but it's more like reading a horoscope than a real psychological assessment.
You're saying it's fun, but not necessarily accurate.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe not the best source of information if you're looking to really understand people.
Right. If you're serious about personality, there are much better books out there.
Like what? Give us some recommendations. What should our listeners be reading instead?
Well, if you're interested in personality types, I'd recommend checking out the Big 5 model.
Big 5.
Yeah. It's the most scientifically validated personality framework we have today. It looks at traits like openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay, so it's a bit more nuanced than just 4 colors.
Way more nuanced. And it's actually backed by research.
So Erikson is basically skipping Psychology 101 and going straight to these unsubstantiated theories.
Pretty much.
All right, so Surrounded by Idiots, not exactly a scientific masterpiece. But what about the writing itself? You mentioned he's funny. What's his style like?
It's very accessible, very easy to read, lots of anecdotes and humor, definitely aimed at a broad audience. Think airport bookstore bestseller.
Okay, so maybe a light read for a beach vacation?
Yeah.
But not something to base your understanding of human behavior on?
Definitely not. You wouldn't go to a comedian for medical advice, could you?
Good point.
Yeah.
But then how do you explain the book's popularity? It's got thousands of positive reviews.
That's the fascinating thing about it. People seem to either love it or hate it. And I think that says something about our desire to understand ourselves and others, even if it means oversimplifying things. Like we were saying, people want easy answers, even if they're not always right. And personality typing, it kind of gives you that, you know, the sense that you can figure people out.
Yeah, it's like a cheat sheet for understanding human behavior.
Exactly. But the danger is that you start putting people in boxes and you miss all the nuances.
Right, because in reality, people are way more complex than any 4-color system could capture.
Exactly. So even if you find Erikson's descriptions funny, or even if you relate to them, you can't really take them at face value.
So it's more like a conversation starter.
I guess you could say that. It's definitely not a definitive guide to anything.
You know, when you were talking about the Big 5, it sounded like a much more, well, scientific approach to personality. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. So unlike DISC, which focuses more on outward behavior, the Big 5 looks at underlying personality traits.
Okay. And you mentioned there were 5 of them.
Right. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
So instead of putting people into these categories,
Yeah.
it's more like a spectrum.
Right.
Huh?
Exactly. Everyone falls somewhere on the spectrum for each trait, so you get a much more well-rounded picture of someone's personality.
That makes a lot more sense.
It
It
really-
acknowledges that we're all different.
Yeah, and it's actually backed by research. Decades of research.
Okay, so Big 5. Definitely something to check out if you're interested in personality.
For sure.
So we've established that Surrounded by Idiots, not exactly a scientific masterpiece.
Right.
But are there any takeaways from the book that could be useful? Like any practical tips?
He does have some general advice about communication, like the importance of tailoring your style to the person you're talking to, which is, good advice in general.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That-
But you could probably get that from any communication book.
Exactly.
Right.
You don't need a pseudoscientific personality system to tell you that.
So it's more about being observant and adaptable than trying to fit people into boxes.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've covered the good, the bad, and the questionable. But I still can't get over how popular this book is.
It's baffling, isn't it?
Why do you think it resonated with so many people, despite all the flaws?
I think it's that desire for simple answers that we were talking about. We want to believe that there's an easy way to understand people. And even if it's not entirely accurate, it can be comforting.
Yeah, I get that. It's like finding your sign in a horoscope. It's not real, but it's still fun.
Exactly. And Erikson is a good storyteller. He keeps you engaged, even if the underlying logic is flawed.
So maybe it's more about the entertainment value than the actual content.
Maybe, but I still think it's important to be critical of what we read. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's true.
True. So where does that leave us? Is Surrounded by Idiots worth reading at all?
If you're looking for a light, fun read, sure, knock yourself out. But if you're looking for real insights into human behavior, I'd skip it.
Solid advice. So stick with the science, folks.
Always. It really does make you wonder, though, why this book is so popular.
Yeah, it's like, what is it about this color coding system that just grabs people?
I think maybe it's just easy. 4 colors, easy to remember, easy to apply.
Yeah, it's like we like to put things into neat little categories.
Right. Even if they don't really belong there.
It's kind of like those personality quizzes online, Which Disney princess are you?
Exactly. We know it's not real science, but it's still fun.
Yeah, and I think Erikson is a good writer, too. He makes it entertaining. It's not like reading a textbook.
No, it's very accessible. He tells stories, he makes jokes.
So maybe that's part of the appeal. It's just a fun way to think about personality.
Yeah, and sometimes that's all you need.
Right. You don't always need a PhD in psychology to get through the day.
Exactly.
So I guess if you're looking for a light read, something to entertain you, maybe Surrounded by Idiots is worth checking out.
I mean, it's not going to hurt you to read it.
But if you're looking for real insights, you're better off looking elsewhere.
Yeah, stick with the science.
All right, so there you have it. Our deep dive into Surrounded by Idiots.
Hopefully that was helpful.
And maybe a little bit entertaining.
Always.
And if you're interested in learning more about personality, there are tons of great resources out there.
Definitely. Don't stop here.
Keep exploring. Keep learning.
And remember, you are more than just a color.
That's a good one. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.